Welcome back to the Edgewater Avenue YouTube channel. Today we have a very exciting tutorial. I don't know that I've ever seen a pattern so in demand. So without further ado, here is the surf suit pattern, the Newport one piece. For materials you will need swimwear fabric. You'd be safe with about 2 yards of fabric for this piece, but it's gonna vary widely depending on what sleeve length that you choose, what size you choose, and what coverage you choose. But I'd say have 2 yards to be safe. Swimwear elastic. Here I'm using 1/4" braided elastic just because I have a ton of it that I'm trying to go through. Really, if you want to be the most correct, you'd want to use rubber elastic, and rubber elastic's just the best option for longevity and chlorine resistance. So if you want to know where to get some of that, I will have a link in the description. Then you're gonna need your typical sewing supplies like a cutting tool, a seam ripper, and it would be helpful for this tutorial to have an acrylic ruler in order to be able to cut the straps, but it's definitely not required. The last item that is essential for this tutorial is the pattern for the Newport one piece, and you can purchase that now at edgewaterave.com. Now I want to take a second and just talk about everything that this pattern includes since it is just fully loaded, but if you're here just for the tutorial, I will have a timestamp with where to go. So this pattern is absolutely loaded with options, and I spent a lot of time getting your feedback on what is needed for this type of style. So first is coverage options. You have 3 options to choose from. There's a thong, a cheeky, and a full coverage. The thong and cheeky version are super high on the hips, and really they're primarily designed with aesthetics in mind. So if you're wanting to look extra spicy, then those are some good options. And the full coverage version is all about being functional, so that one's going to be lower on the hips, and it's also going to have a wider gusset. If you surf or if you plan to move a lot in your swimsuit, then I would recommend the full coverage. You'll be fine with a thong or cheeky. Obviously, you need to be able to move, but if you want like the most functional fit, definitely go for the full coverage. And if you didn't want a full coverage, but you wanted something functional, you could combine the cheeky cut with the full coverage, how low it goes on the hips, and customize a coverage that's perfect for you. So second choice you have to make, there are 3 different sleeve lengths to choose from. There's a short sleeve, a 3/4 length sleeve, and there is a long sleeve. Also, this pattern is designed to be fully reversible, so really when you make one swimsuit, you have 2. But like I said, I really wasn't joking when I said this pattern is fully loaded. So I really think that there's something for everyone. And regardless of what version you choose, they are all designed to accommodate movement. Specifically, there is a little extra length in the torso so you can raise your arms comfortably. And I also chose to use a raglan sleeve, which allows for the most movement of your arms and shoulders. So there's some background on what's included in your pattern purchase. Now let's get into how it's made. The first step in this tutorial, you do need to make a decision on which one to make. For this video, I chose to make the thong version, and I'm making a 3/4 length sleeve. So first, you're gonna get out your first fabric, and you're gonna cut 1 front, 1 back, and 2 sleeves. If you wanna mix up the fabric between what color the sleeves are versus the bodice, now is the time to do that. Right now, we're just making one side of a reversible swimsuit. So whatever combo you wanna do for this. And when cutting the sleeves, you're going to want to fold over the fabric and cut 2 at once. And while you do this, you're going to end up cutting both the left and the right sleeve at the same time. But if you do cut them one at a time, don't forget to flip that sleeve pattern so you can account for both the left and right sleeves. So now that we have those pieces, we're going to do the exact same thing with our second set of fabric. Cut 1 front, 1 back, and 2 sleeves. And in whichever fabric you choose, you're going to be cutting 2 straps, and the measurements for those are included inside the pattern. Now we have all of our pieces. We have 2 fronts, 2 backs, and 4 sleeves. So let's get into the process of putting everything together. Now, as always with sewing, there are a bunch of different ways to make this. I'm just going to be showing you one way today, and I think that this way is probably the easiest to grasp. I hope so. But that being said, this is more of an advanced tutorial, so it really does help if you have some experience under your belt with reversible patterns, with swimwear. Yeah, regardless, I do encourage you to do a test garment before you make a final piece. Just make sure that you understand the way that this is gonna go. All right, so first we're going to sew the darts on each of the front pieces. I'm not gonna spend too much time on how to do this, but keep in mind there is a 1/4 inch of seam allowance already taken into account for this dart. So just make sure that you're sewing a 1/4 inch in at the seam line. And I'm using a regular straight stitch on my sewing machine. Once that's done, you're gonna match fronts with fronts and backs with backs, right sides together. Sew along the leg holes and attach elastic. So I mention this in every tutorial just in case it's your first one you've seen of mine. I just breeze through talking about elastic, but I actually have a full playlist of a couple different videos explaining everything you need to know about elastic. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about, I'll have that linked. And I find for the leg holes, the elastic tends to sit better on the non-dominant side. So that's where I'm going to be attaching it. Then you're going to match the left sleeves and the right sleeves, each with right sides together. So left with left, right with right. The sleeves aren't symmetrical, so make sure that you're matching them correctly. And at this step, you're gonna sew along the wrist for the left and right sleeves, and you're also gonna attach elastic to that seam. For the sleeves, I liked it best when I attached elastic to the dominant side. Really with the whole dominant, non-dominant side of where to attach the elastic, I find that either side is fine. Really, if you're doing a good job sewing the elastic, regardless of what side you're wearing the reversible, it will still look fine. You're also gonna sew your straps in half lengthwise with right sides together. And I also suggest you sew just one end of the straps closed. Elastic is optional, I chose not to attach it. So our next objective is to attach the sleeves to the fronts and to the backs. This is where it gets messy, and visually this is pretty tricky to show. I like to first lay out all my pieces in a circle, making sure that the same side is facing up. This gives me a display of how everything will be sewn together, and it helps me keep a little more organized. My intention is going to be matching each of the sleeves to their corresponding shoulder seams with right sides together. I'm going to be using my sewing clips to attach each seam. This way, when I take the piece over to my sewing machine, it doesn't get all mixed up. Again, visually, this is very hard to show, but if you do keep your pieces organized, then you can get through it. So in total, you're going to be sewing 8 seams. Once everything is clipped, you can take this on over to your sewing machine and sew these seams. I didn't attach elastic to these seams, but if you wanted to, it wouldn't hurt to use a clear elastic tape as a stabilizer. So the sleeves are all attached, and now our next step is going to be sewing the neckline, the low back, and then attaching in the straps that we cut. But in order to get to that step, we need to do some maneuvering. So right now in this layout, I have my front and back on opposite ends, and I want the back to be folded inside of the front with right sides together. The way I'm gonna do this is by grabbing the back piece from inside its neckline, reaching through the gusset, and then pulling the whole piece through until it's right side out. Then take the back piece and now stuff it into the front piece through its open neckline. I like to take a clip and pin the gusset. It just helps me keep a little more organized, but we aren't going to be sewing it at this step. So now if you flip open one layer of the neckline on the front piece, you'll see that the other front piece neckline is waiting right there for you. And this means right sides are together. And perfectly as it happens, that low back is also sandwiched side. So we don't have to worry about that right now. We're first gonna sew this neckline. So for the sake of this video, I'm breaking up this step into first doing the front piece neckline and then doing the low back. Really, you can do this all in one step, but for the video's sake, I think it makes it a little bit clearer to show what I'm doing in 2 separate steps. So before I attach the elastic onto the neckline, I like to first do a basting stitch. And this is a long straight stitch that's intended to be removed before the garment is finished. This will help you make sure that your seams are perfectly lined up before you really solidify it with the elastic. So once you have your basting stitch, you can attach elastic onto the neckline. The elastic is done on the neckline, and now we're going to be doing some more maneuvering. Basically what I'm going to be doing is pulling that neckline seam out until I start to get to that low back seam. And you'll notice that as I'm pulling, I am able to get right sides together for that low back. So just move through and clip as you go. Again, do a basting stitch before you attach the elastic. Once that basting stitch is done, you can attach elastic onto the low back. So to finish this part, we need to attach in our straps. Take both of your straps to the right side and then insert them inside of the strap openings. Pin and then sew them down to secure them in. Just make sure to do this with both sides. Okay, so we are getting there. We just have 3 seams left, each of the sides and then the gusset. And we're gonna be doing this all in the same arrangement that we have now. First, let's knock out the gusset since that's the easiest. You are simply going to line them up and sew across all 4 layers of fabric. I'm using a straight stitch and then I'm gonna trim off the excess. All right, so that was the easy part. You're gonna move your piece around and you are going to align the sleeves and the sides so that they're all lined up. You're gonna be sewing one continuous line that sews across the sleeve and the sides. And you're gonna do that across all 4 layers of fabric on both of the sides. And this is gonna be another step where I highly recommend doing a basting stitch first. The way that I like to do this is take out the inner layer and use a basting stitch just to sew those 2 inner layers down. And then I'll go back and sew my final stitch. So to sew these side seams, I do recommend using an overlock stitch, just because this is a really active style one piece. Like this seam, just raising your arms, it might stretch. And so better be safe than sorry for something like this. I've made a few with straight stitches and I've tested them out enough to have that movement, and the straight stitches are fine, but I'd rather not gamble with that. The final part is seam ripping a hole to be able to take this piece to the right side. I chose to do this close to the gusset in a discreet place. You could do this anywhere, maybe even forgo sewing the straps in and using that hole to take everything to the right side, and then just top stitching the straps into place. Totally up to you. Either way, you're going to be using this hole to take everything to the right side. Your final step is finishing off this hole. You can use either a straight stitch or stitch by hand using an invisible stitch. That completes the Newport one piece. A lot of work went into this pattern, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. For more information and photos, I have the pattern linked in the description. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all your support on this. I've had so many ups and downs with the development of this, but Again, I've like never seen such a reaction to a pattern. You guys absolutely gassed me up and I'm so happy with how it's turned out. I got so much feedback from you guys on Instagram that this pattern really is a reflection of what you wanted. So I can't wait to find out what you think. So thank you for watching and I will see you soon. I have 2 new patterns coming right after this.